Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Caccera, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Caccera.
Welcome in, Joe Caccera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you for those that are following us on Facebook. We appreciate that very much. As you know, we want to try to continue to grow the show and the audience as much as we can, and one of the ways to do that is to use social media to the best of our benefit, and the opportunity for you, the viewers, to do that. We'll continue to do that. Again, this is a podcast, however, so if you're watching the video at this time or the interview, do me a favor when you get a chance, download the podcast. You could go on anywhere online and just type in Real Estate Radio Live and download the podcast. That way you could listen to the show anytime at your convenience. As you know, for almost 8 years, for those that have been following the show, the focus has been education and information, and the continued focus of that will be the same. So you, the consumer, what we were trying to do on a regular basis, give you enough information, education, so that you make wise decisions in and around your real estate. However, over the last year or so, we've added some new components to the show. We're excited about some new developments, some new series. We started a year ago with Jack Russo with Computer Law Group, and he is, first year we talked about starting something new in Silicon Valley, just to kind of give you a quick summary. And we went through the process of starting a company right from, how to name it, how to pick the right people, how to get investors, how to attract talent, all those types of things. Now this year, we're focusing on growing your business. So when our schedules permit, we have Jack back on. Unfortunately, we don't have him in studio today, but he is calling in via somewhere, I think your office. Welcome in, Jack. How you doing?
I'm very good. I apologize. I wish I could have driven down this afternoon, but I had some meetings that ended up taking far longer, and I thought I had a guest that was committed, and then the guest explained to me that he had a complication in his life. So I'm going to introduce a topic that hopefully will bring in at least 6 other guests over time, because I call it the 7 essences of company growth, leveraging a little bit the 7 essences of personal growth that we talked about in an earlier show this year.
Right.
And you probably even have my 7 triangles there still, which I'm due to pick up at some point.
I look at them every day I come into the studio.
They're motivating, right?
They're here. They're good.
Aren't they motivating?
And, the visual effects are good. The visual effects, we got the map up here. Most people can't see it because it's against the wall, right? The timeline of the technology. We got that up there.
I'll tell you something. I'll tell you, Joe, I had a guy in my office that came in from Denver last night, and he was waiting. We were starting a meeting with a group of people, and he was waiting, looking at that same graphic, and he said, that really is the story of the growth of Silicon Valley over the last over 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
And I said, precisely, it is.
Amazing. It's a good graph. Today we're going to talk about the 7 essence of company growth. And as Jack mentioned, what we're going to do is we can't cover them all in depth. So over the next several weeks, Jack will have guests on to really specifically dig down and drill down and unpack each of these 7. So you want to give us kind of a quick summary, Jack, on this, and then you want to talk about the team today?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's really 7 big points that we need to make. And for those who didn't hear the 7 essences of personal growth, you may want to link it to the explanation of this podcast, because I don't have that reference handy, but I want to say it was a few podcasts ago.
Right.
But I like to think, and lots of founders that I meet say, wow, you really have reduced it down to just 7 ideas. But I like to think when you get to company growth, what is most important is that you're looking at these 7 pillars of your business. And if you don't have one of these pillars, you're going to have a wobbly business. So you have to think of them as, this is all foundational. So I'll just reel off the 7.
Okay.
Because then we'll cover the first, or maybe even the first and the second, probably just the first. But the first is, you have to have a good team. It can't really just be one person. Occasionally it's one person, And we'll talk about that aberrational case when it's just one person. But in general, there's a team, and the team really is leveraged by both the talent and the culture that's being created around the team. And I'll talk more about that later. Second, you have a technology that the team really believes in. That's typically more than an idea. That's usually more than even a collection of ideas. And it gets multiplied by some innovation. For example, blockchain, artificial intelligence, deep learning, big data. These are all innovations that are being applied to many different ideas that are creating new technologies. So the team is very invested in the idea, the innovation behind it, and the technology that's being produced.
Okay.
Thirdly, you've got some financing. Usually it's very much self-starting financing, but friends and family play a big role. We've talked about that. We talked about that last year. We talk about it often. We'll talk about it again. It's usually more than just friends and family. It's usually even more than just angels, usually more than just angels and or advisors. It's usually a collection of people that are propelling you to get the bigger financing you'll need, because it's very hard for a single idea to go viral without there being some real financing behind it. So those are the top three. If you don't have those three, the stool is pretty much going to fall over. I mean, the chair with at least three of the seven, maybe you have the beginning of something that can be supporting some real weight. But the reality is that you're going to have a wobbly stool.
Right.
The other four that we'll spend more time on is demand. There has to be some real customer for this. Fifth is there's got to be some scaling potential. Just having one customer is not enough. Sixth is there's got to be some protection. And then seventh is there's got to be some ability to deal with competition, because it will emerge eventually, sometimes sooner than you want to believe, and sometimes even from one of your ex-founders or ex-employees, which is a very hard and bitter pill if that's what happens to you. So that's the seven, and they do map to a certain degree to the previous discussion we had.
I was just going to ask, so these are the seven, not necessarily in chronological order, right? I mean, that could be, for instance, I'm looking at demand. You should probably figure out if you have the demand before some of these are just a critical seven. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you're recognizing a market that even allows you to assemble a team. I don't think you would have assembled a team behind Bundle Select without seeing all the fat that exists in the market and the customer demand for cutting fat.
Right.
I mean, fat cutting is happening all over the place. We see it over and over again. It's happening to all of us. It's happening to lawyers. It's happening to accountants. It's happening to the medical profession. It's happening in the real estate profession. Internet and internet services are driving cost cutting. There's no question about it. So yeah, absolutely. You have to have your eyes on what are people saying? What are they doing? How are they responding? Some people call it the pain. So you might say, without demand, why even assemble a team? But I have to tell you, a lot of teams get assembled without realizing whether the demand is really there.
Yeah.
They just get assembled around, if we build it, they will come.
Got it.
And that often is a big mistake. Yeah.
So to team, I mean, this is, Jack, we've talked about this before and highlighted this. All these things are critical, important, but you could argue, you could almost argue looking at this list, do you think that assembling the right team could be the most important piece of this?
Yeah, I think if you look at most businesses that succeed, well, certainly most businesses that fail, the team falls apart somewhere. The team becomes unglued. People start leaving. People start being half-hearted. People start having one leg and doing something else. And teams that unravel usually unravel businesses. So if the team is not very well glued together, that is an immediate problem that gets identified almost instantly by a venture capitalist or a sophisticated angel investor, and certainly by an angel group. I've had a case this week where literally the team was unraveled because the spouses are fighting. The spouse of the principal founder forced the founder out of his own home, locked him out and said, look, I can't live with you. Usually it's I can't live without you either, but this was like, and I can live without you. and I am going to live without you. And of course, that's pretty demoralizing. I won't say whether the person is, male or female, or whether the relationship is male-female, male-male, female-female. It can happen in any variation on that theme. Personal relationships break down. And that's why there's a mapping to the 7 essences, because your founder or founders or co-founders really have to be in good health, and they've got to have somewhat normal personal lives, because if their personal life, whether it's due to some health issue or some addiction issue or some failure to be both sane and sober, as we talked about for those that might remember that discussion from a few weeks ago,
right.
The reality is that team is going to get unglued because the founder or founders are going to get unglued as a result of their personal relationships getting unglued. Now, I'm not here to do marriage counseling or couples counseling, but I am here to tell you that most investors will pay close attention to, is this person stable in the relationships that he or she has with others beyond just the team and into their personal lives as well? So it's a real issue, Joe.
Yeah.
I'm sure you see it all the time yourself.
I do.
You spent some times around startups, and you see it even in the people you work with, right?
Yeah, you do. And, there's so much to this team part. I really do. Because, we've seen, the other thing I've seen and I've experienced myself is you start with a partner, you think that you're both on the same page, putting the same amount of time, energy, effort, resources in. And sometimes as even early as that changes. And, someone decides to go another different direction. And then, you have to kind of go to plan B. So I guess to drill down on this one, because it's so important, Jack, what would you, obviously, if you're just starting a company, you want to try to build the right team. What are some of the things, if you've done this before, the interview questions, everything may be a little bit more obvious, but for those that are just starting a company, I guess you go with your relationships, and maybe you look for references, referrals, and ask people you trust.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't pay attention to other teams that succeed. So, for example, if you're building a SaaS model-based company and your company does not have certain team members that other competitors do, you've got to take a hard look, because anyone that's going to be an investor, venture investor, angel investor, or otherwise, they're going to say, your team is lacking a core function. How are you accomplishing, and just fill in the blank, how are you accomplishing the CRO, Chief Revenue Officer? We had a podcast about this. Who's the next C-suite person? Who's going to be the Chief Financial Officer? Who's going to be the Chief, Technology Officer? You may be the CEO, and of course, we've seen teams that are co-CEOs, and those become immediately suspicious that there's some power struggle going on. So these gentlemen or ladies and gentlemen can't agree on who's the real leader. That tends to be a big red flag. So, yeah, I think for sure you have to pay close attention not only to the people, but also to the positions. If the person that is the CTO really wants to be the CEO, and the person that's the CEO doesn't want him or her to be anything other than the CTO, there's probably a brewing conflict there.
Yeah.
That's probably something that's going to be a problem. Remember, most startups don't get to success in even 5 years.
Yeah.
Microsoft took 10 years to get there. Amazon took close to 10 years to get there. Most startups, as much as people want to talk about things going viral, I say to people who come to my office, hey, look, you're in for a 5-year, maybe even longer hike. Make sure you're going on that hike with people that you like hiking with, because if they're going to whine or you're going to whine to them, trust me, the odds of that hike being completed are not very high.
Yeah.
In fact, the odds are pretty high that it won't happen.
No, that's a good point, Jack. I think a lot of people, especially in Silicon Valley, where there's kind of glamour and glitz. This is our version of Hollywood via the Silicon Valley with business, right? High tech. They think that it's billionaires overnight and all of a sudden you flip a switch and look at this, they went public. That's not it at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good movie playing right now from HBO on the Theranos story. I hate to keep bringing that up, but it's kind of the, mega failure example of $2 billion or so of venture capital totally failed. A company that was worth close to $10 billion on paper, maybe a lot more than that. A founder that was the first female billionaire. People know that story, but the film is just immense in explaining at least one theory of what happened, which is that there was in the early days super optimism that a blood testing device, a portable blood testing device, a low-cost portable blood testing device could be modeled after an iPhone to automate the blood testing of hundreds of tests at very low cost, like a little tiny personal computer, and it could have a very simple iPhone-like interface. I mean, that's a marvelous thing to imagine, and it's a great idea, and it might have even been a great technology if the ideas multiplied times the innovation were matched by a talented team that was motivated by the right culture. But the story that film takes is that the culture was almost corrupt in its view of hiding the dirty laundry, hiding all the failures, hiding all the problems, and siloing the engineers away from the marketing people. So the marketing people that at least showed on the program were like, we thought it was succeeding. We were told to play it like it was a success, like it was a done deal. And the engineering side is like, look, we're not getting it to work. It's failing. It's breaking. Stuff is spilling. This is almost an impossible thing to put into a small PC cabinet. We need a bigger size device. We can't make the ultra thin TV without starting with the thick TV first. We would never have gotten to the flat panel that's behind you without going through like 10 generations of ginormous TVs that you'll remember as a kid. Yeah. They used to come delivered by tractor trailer almost, right?
Right.
Big boxes for a big screen.
Yep. No, it's very true. Absolutely. So the team is critical. It is, and you have to make sure, and I guess this is the job of the CEO. It's great if you could assemble a talented group, and let's just say have your CFO, CMO, and maybe a CTO, and then you have your CEO. So you have a group of talented people, but talk about how important it is then for the CEO to then articulate, Jack, the mission, the objectives, and then who's driving those, right? Because you could have all these talented people, but super important to have the direction.
Right. You got to have someone that's got a vision, someone that is obviously optimistic. And that was the other part of the film that I think is worth commenting on. Optimism has to be hedged by a dose of reality, which is if the device cannot be in a box that's, 12 inches by 12 inches by 12 inch cube, and the engineers keep telling you it's got to be in a box that's 24 by 24 by 24, and you as a marketing person, as a CEO, you're more of a marketing person than an engineer, you might want to defer to the engineers because you're not an engineer. You're a marketing person. I'm sure Steve Jobs, if he were on this phone call or he was on this video, he'd say, no, you guys have it wrong. You just keep forcing those engineers to get it down to 12 by 12 by 12 or you don't ship. Right. Okay, you don't ship, but you may never be able to actually get to market before somebody else gets to market. So that's the interrelationship between the team, the technology, and all the other factors we talked about, including competition, because if someone's got an idea that says we've got to lower the cost of blood testing or lower the cost of real estate transactions, trust me, there's a million other people that are thinking about also coming out with something that will lower those costs. That problem doesn't go away. That problem acts as a motivator for far more than one team and one set of investors. In fact, there are venture firms, and people don't understand this, but there are venture firms that will actually finance multiple teams that are ultimately competing on the view that the category will emerge and let the best team win. And so much money will be made from the best team that the fact that money is thrown away on the others is not a big deal. And that surprises people, that venture people can be so indifferent to loyalties. And I don't want to be critical about venture people, but the difference with our firm is we're very much linked or yoked to the hip of the founder and the team. We're tied to the intellectual capital, not the venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is venture capitalists are become more money managers.
Right.
And if they think an idea is worth pursuing, so Theranos as an idea, as a low-cost blood testing solution, there are going to be other people that are going to invest in that. The reality is that is a problem that needs to be solved. Somebody's going to solve it. It just may not be Elizabeth Holmes or her co-founders or her team or her C-suite team. They may well be going to jail at this point. There's still a criminal case pending against them. And the point that was made by the movie was, look, in Silicon Valley, we become so optimistic that we often overstate reality. And reality was overstated by them.
Yeah, right. Let's spend a couple of minutes. The other piece that I am going through personally, and then I know you have a lot of experience with too, Jack, you're at a certain level and you're just starting to bring team members on, but you have to evaluate the capital that you have or maybe the next raise. And so, it's not necessarily the case, right, Jack, that automatically you fill all these C-suite positions. You could look for the need initially and say, well, we have the CEO here. Maybe what's the most important if we need two C-suites is a CMO and maybe a CTO versus, or do we really need a CFO right now? Isn't that all also part of kind of evaluation process at stages of the company?
Absolutely. I mean, money is always a gating factor. Most startups do not have the luxury of venture capital or the luxury of adequate financing. They often are self-financing, friends and family financing, bootstrap financing, using stock options, all those forms of currencies that we've talked about. And they don't have the luxury of saying, oh, I could build this perfect team and we can have everything covered. They're often, the CEO, like yourself with Bundle Select, is wearing multiple hats, doing multiple jobs, carrying out multiple functions, getting help from advisors, getting help from board members. But fundamentally, you're being very careful not to sort of kill with early dilution the value of the company, because then you're just working for the man. Go back to the 1960s. It's probably before your time when I say 1960s, Joe. But remember, during that period when people didn't want to work for the man, working for the man was viewed as just working a job that you didn't really feel comfortable doing.
Yeah.
So when you get diluted as a founder and your team gets diluted to under 50%, it feels like you're working for the venture capital.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like you're working for a business that you created. So those financial constraints are always real. And they do put a lot of pressure on a lot of things where you have to be really smart. So I know people these days who don't use anything other than virtual offices. They don't want to pay rent.
Right.
That has a cost. The team is not together as often as you might want them together.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it's virtual means you're not spending as much time in meetings. That can be positive, but it can lead to some misdirection.
Right.
Emails can only go so far. Virtual conferences can go only so far. I know they don't hire lots of support people. Their view is, let's use the computerization. So there's absolute trade-offs. So this third function of trying to get something to show to an investor or a team or a group of investors with a team that has technology or has the beginning of some technology, not even yet a shippable product, but something that's demonstrable. It's always a race with not enough gas in the tank.
Right.
Always, can we get from here to New York on this little gas, given that we're leaving from San Francisco? It's a long journey, and a lot more gas is going to be needed, but what pit stops you take become really important CEO, CFO, CTO group decisions, often board level decisions as well.
Yeah. We have just a couple minutes left before you kind of summarize the team concept and we move on the next several weeks, Jack. Remind the listeners and the viewers in this case, give them, again, information about your firm, what you guys do, and how they could reach you.
Sure. So Jack Russo, managing partner at Computer Law Group. We're in Palo Alto, www.computerlaw.com. We've been practicing here. For me, it's going on 40 years. It's hard to believe. I was talking to one of my colleagues who's at Fenwick and West, where I started, what seems like many decades ago. And he said, yeah, Jack, we're all getting older, man. Wake up and smell the coffee. And I said, yeah, thanks for reminding me. And he said, there's nothing you can stop with time, but what you look for is to replace aging with wisdom, or hope that wisdom is outracing aging. And of course, we represented everything. Yeah, exactly. We hope that the wisdom can make up for whatever other deficiencies we have. And, at the end of the day, we try to help founders, help teams, help startup companies get out of the garage. That's kind of what we've been doing here for quite a while. The phone number is 650-327-9800. We have a small San Francisco office as well, but our main office is in downtown Palo Alto. We have our own building in downtown Palo Alto. We're right up the block from the Apple store in downtown Palo Alto. And so we like to see companies at the early stage. We like to talk about these issues. I think there is a really good conceptual outline here of the 7 pillars of success, or what might be called the 7 essences of company growth. We've only covered the first and a bit of the second one. Hopefully we spend more time over the ensuing weeks, and I can bring in some other guests too that can speak to each of these 7 items, because they all play a big role beyond just the start and right into the growth of the company.
Yeah. So why don't you, right before we kind of shut it down today, why don't you then go through the 7 again, Jack, for everybody. And then for those that are tuning in now, remember, we're going to go through this. Jack covered number 1 today was team. We went in depth, real down with that. And then over the next couple of weeks, we'll get into the rest of these 6.
Right. And they're all interrelated. So don't think of them as just one-off. And they really have, sub-stories to each of them. So think of them as, these are the 7 checklist items that any venture capitalist or investor is going to be looking closely at, and they do interrelate. So the team is highly, highly important, and without the team, you're probably not even going to get the meeting, because you're not going to be believed as serious.
Right.
So the team is doing work typically in an area of technology. It could be computerization. It can be hardware, software, biotech. I had lunch today with a group that has a biotech invention. They think they're off to the races. They have a team. They have a technology. I was talking about these 7 areas with them, and they were like, oh, we hadn't thought about one of them. So, team and technology, they have to be believed. They have to be understood. They have to be like, hey, this is for real. This solves a real problem. Thirdly is you want to have some financing, certainly some self-financing, certainly ideally some friends and family financing. Even better would be some outside advisor financing, angel financing, some folks who believe enough in the team and the technology, even before the product. The technology is different from the product. The technology drives the product or service or deliverable. And that's really the 4th thing that should come out, which is some evidence that there is something that can be demonstrated that actually looks real. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to at least suggest that there's some reality to what this technology can produce. And lots of times that's where the team, even with the technology and even with financing, cannot get out of the gate. I mean, Theranos did it with a lot of sort of false demos. That wasn't ethically real, which challenged, obviously, the ethics of the team ultimately and destroyed that business. But it's got to be a real demo. It's got to be something that maybe is not yet at the level of provable scaling, but that might be thought of as, they're interrelated, which is there more than one customer is the next item.
Right.
It can't just be a single customer. If it is a single customer like the government, I guess it could be a single customer if you're doing a new B-52 bomber. But, man, you better have a great relationship with people that influence,
right.
That customer is so big. You better have a lot of little influencers that are helping you with that gigantic, ginormous customer. But believe me, that's a hard situation. So having real customer demand that's, provable becomes important. And usually the demo is what leads to identifying the customer segment, or the area that you're going to target. Then you've got to have some way to have a business model that is defensible, that establishes profitability. Now, Uber hasn't done that yet. Lyft hasn't done that yet, but they're both succeeding with immense financing. Mm-hmm. It's another question whether ultimately those businesses can sustain those losses. My own belief, as you've heard on this show, is they are developing artificial intelligence and other products in the background from all the data that they're compiling from the taxi business that they're in, so they can lose money in the expectation that their products, whether they're mapping products,
right.
self-driving car products, there's a host of other products that must be in the background to justify that huge loss that they sustain every quarter. Now, maybe they'll ultimately change their pricing model or consolidate. I don't think they could sustain losses forever. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting whether that business model, but you want to have a business model that proves itself out. And lastly, you have to be able to address competition.
Yeah.
You have to be able to anticipate competition. You have to be able to fence it off, whether that's with intellectual property or with distribution or with branding or with something more or better. Competition is inevitable, just like Tesla is facing competition from multiple German rivals who are coming in with battery-operated cars. It's inevitable. And as much as Elon Musk is brilliant and has said, hey, we started a revolution, and 10 years ago people didn't believe it, the reality is for Tesla to succeed, it's got to be able to beat the competition.
Right.
And that typically is on price, positioning, quality, all the differentiators that matter to customers sticking with the brand and not switching out.
Yeah.
So those are the big 7 topics we're going to cover. We've touched upon the first. The first is arguably foundational to all the rest. Without a really solid team, it's like having no exceptional horsepower to get the work done. Yeah. Even the great idea is going to go nowhere. As you know, that can happen.
All right. Well, you've covered the 7. We didn't cover them, but we kind of outlined them, I would say. And then he focused on the team, as he mentioned, the strong foundation of which to build on. And so in the next couple of weeks, we'll continue to cover the rest of these 6 and summarize as well. Jack, thanks for taking some time and calling in.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. We'll take care. See you next time, Jack.
Sure. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. Joe Kuchera with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks you for those who are tuning in. Thank you for those that are following us on Facebook. We appreciate that again very much. For those that haven't downloaded the podcast, please go anywhere online and just type in Real Estate Radio Live. Download the podcast. Follow us at your convenience. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at RERadiolive.com.